Okay, good afternoon to everyone. Well, for me, it's a pleasure to start this seminar. As you know, this is the first seminar of the Working Group 1 seminar series that we start from the COST Action, that is called the Geography of New Working Spaces and the Impact on the Periphery. Okay, I'm Carles Mendez, the Working Group 1 leader of the COST Action. And this I'm going to introduce this first working group seminar. And the presenter of this first seminar will be Grzegorz Micek. Okay, Grzegorz is an associate professor at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, in Poland, where he has been teaching and conducting research in the field of economic geography for many years. Grzegorz' expertise is in topics about location determinants and mechanisms behind agglomeration and co-agglomeration of new industries, local economic and social impact studies, also the analysis of innovative, creative, and collaborative spaces. Okay. He has dedicated most of his research to the Central and Eastern Europe areas, and he has received different grants from European Union, the National Science Center in Poland, and Regional Studies Association. Also, Grzegorz has been the Working Group 1 leader of the COST Actions till last December. And he has published in very, very good journals as European Planning Studies, the Cambridge Journal of Regions, Economic and Society, and others. So Greg, you have between 40 and 45 minutes to present, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Carles, for such a thorough description of my experience. I'm really honored to be here. I mean, we do have collaboration with Carles for a long time. Until I would say, Carles visited us in Krakow it was 2 years ago. Yes, yeah, Carles already free.
In 2021 was
2021. Yes, yes. Okay, thanks. So my talk today will be not so long as Carles has told you. I mean, I would try to be short, concise, and just to leave maybe some time for discussion. And I feel my speech will be I hope it will be of some interest to you. So I will focus on challenges of studies, especially spatial studies of new working spaces. Well, by new working spaces, I mean different types of spaces, like mainly co-working spaces, but also hacker spaces, maker spaces, fab labs, creative hubs. So different types of spaces, and especially in these times, in the recent years and months, I mean, hybrid spaces, especially in functional dimension, hybrid and functional dimension. So it's gonna be a kind of an introductory speech to the series of seminars of Working Group 1. So what I was trying to do, I was trying to identify gaps in the literature that could be filled in. I mean, the gaps especially of studies of location factors, location patterns, and so on. Different spatialities, let's say, different spatialities of new working spaces. So the speech is divided into 3 parts, 3 sections. The first one, I would like to briefly introduce initial assumptions that are important, just to know what is my background and what is the background of my perspective on the spatial studies of new working spaces. Then I have identified 3 groups of challenges of studies of new working spaces: conceptual studies, methodology related challenges, and research topic related challenges. And finally, I will just give you a couple of directions of further research, so the future research avenues, let's say, in the other words. So what are the initial assumptions? My talk will be given from the perspective of an economic geographer, or you could also argue, I mean, I'm somehow urban or regional economist. So it will be different than the perspective of, I don't know, sociologists or urban sociologists, for instance, or someone who works in, let's say, management studies, or even in real estate. So it's a very specific, I would say, a bit narrow perspective. But I think it could be interesting for you. So I will give you my personal reflections of the current state of the art. Perhaps these reflections are biased because probably I know some fields of the literature better, some papers better, and the other I do not have the access, for instance. But generally, will be my personal views. So it will be mainly based on the literature. I'm not going to cite a lot of literature because my assumption is that you roughly know the literature. So I'm using quite limited references, but of course, I would rather focus on the identification of the potential research avenues and the potential problems, challenges. Yes. Okay, so my focus would be on location factors and geography of co-working spaces, mainly on co-working spaces, because what we are focusing in our COST Action, these are mainly co-working spaces, although I feel there is a large gap when it comes to studying the other types of spaces. So I will focus on location factors and location patterns of co-working spaces, meaning the spatialities of co-working spaces. I'm excluding this, the topic of socio-economic impact of new working spaces, or direct or indirect effects, the issues that are covered by working group 2, and also the policy related issues like working group 3, even if I will pose some essential questions or crucial questions with regard to it, but on the few questions, let's say. And the focus of my talk will be on co-working spaces, although I feel that we are still lacking, I mean, a kind of understanding how the other spaces function, even if there is a vast majority of papers, especially when it comes to creative, especially when it comes to hybrid spaces, especially when it comes to creative hubs. There's a vast majority of papers, and I think these different strands of literature are not fully or not strongly linked. That's also a problem. Well, let me move on to the description of conceptual challenges of spatial studies of new working spaces. What I feel is the problem is that there is absolutely no combination, no mix of existing approaches. I mean, in economic geography, but also in regional studies, we do identify a couple of important conceptual and methodological approaches, like classical or neoclassical one, behavioral one, evolutionary economic geography, institutional economic geography. These are various approaches that are not, they often do not coexist in the same type of research, but research are rather quite narrowly focused on one of these, on a single approach. I think that's a problem, because when we want to unravel or uncover the full reality of how new working spaces exist, that we should look from different perspectives. So I think that's a problem. So I think what would be, I mean, recommended, that would be nice to see, I mean, the papers that take both the neoclassical and behavioral perspective. For instance, that's the very easy one, I would say. So the combined approach using mixed methods, that would be really nice. And we do not really do it in our studies, especially in COST Action. I mean, to some extent maybe, but for a very limited one, let's say. What else? I mean, there is a lack of methodological integration with existing approaches. So for instance, I mean, even if we have papers in neoclassical approach, then it's not fully, that is not clearly, I mean, or directly stated it's a neoclassical approach. And especially when there are papers in behavioral approach, they do not really, I mean, agree that they use this approach, and it's just somewhere hidden. Yeah. So I mean, when it comes to, I mean, the methodological background, I mean, there is still something to do in this respect. There is, I would say there are separate strands of research of co-working spaces, business incubators, creative hubs, maker spaces. These are separate strands of research. And there are no attempts, or almost no attempts, I mean, to combine these strands of researchers. Of course, you could argue co-working spaces operate in different ways than business incubators and creative hubs. You're right. But there is not a knowledge borrowed from or borrowed between these different strands of research, different types of new working spaces. Yes. What else? I mean, what I think, I mean, our studies are mainly empirical ones, honestly. So we do have a solid empirical background. Let's say I will come back to it later on. But links with existing theoretical construct like urban resilience, localized capabilities, even with the concept of creating class, are still, I would say, understudied. Yes. So there's quite a lot to do. I mean, because we are good in empirics, we have nice data, but still, I mean, when it comes to theory or theoretical constructs, we really do not win. Let's say, at least, yeah. What is also quite important to underline and emphasize is that, especially in the COST group, but not only, I mean, most of the research is biased towards, I mean, studying the location factors, which is not wrong, of course. But we do usually treat co-working spaces as synonymous as services, yes? So, because, I mean, when we study location factors, co-working spaces, we usually describe these factors based on the similar typology of location factors that has been conducted or that has been constructed for services, business services, or general, not consumer services, but let's say business services. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm saying it is narrowing our perspective. So I guess there is a group of factors that are not identified in location studies of services, but that can be applied to co-working spaces. And in the COST action, we also study peripheries, and still I think we haven't come to a good conclusion what these peripheries are. So we do use this term peripheries, but in different countries we do understand by peripheries, I would say, a bit different terms. That's also a problem, with conceptual problem. What is also quite important, I would say, in our studies, especially spatial studies, this is that the notion of co-working space is too often treated as a black box. So there is not an internal structure in it. But in fact, co-working spaces is built or is organized around people. Yeah, and these are people who build the co-working space itself. So, and we sometimes in our empirical analysis treat co-working spaces as, I would say, too homogeneous. Yes. So we do not, I do understand our studies are limited, but we sometimes do not look at the users. Yes. I mean, of course, these are different studies and a large amount of studies that focus on users. I would say very large amount. Yeah. But on the other hand, when we would like to know, I mean, how the co-working, why do co-working spaces emerge in specific places in specific cities? We should know how users operate, or how do users behave, and what do users represent? Yeah. What kind of professions are inside? Because these are different people, yeah, also, yes. And I think that when we were, especially in neoclassical approach, that applies, I mean, these points that are shown here apply to neoclassical approach. I mean, we do not distinguish between hybrid, especially in terms of functional hybridity, and non-hybrid co-working spaces. This distinction is rarely made, and this is a problem because I think there are different, and of course it should be tested. I think there are different location factors, and also I think patterns to some extent of hybrid co-working spaces and non-hybrid co-working spaces. That are some papers that show it, but still, I mean, this number of these papers, or I mean, the amount of these papers is very limited, or is limited to case studies mainly. Let me move on to the methodology-related challenges of our studies in working group 1. What we have found out with Ilaria when we tried to do a literature review of various studies of location factors, is we have found out that there is a very few qualitative research of location factors of working spaces. And that's a reason why we should somehow start them, because I feel we are really following a very neoclassical approach in the studies of. I really appreciate, I mean, studies in different countries, but what have been published in, I don't know, in different journals. I mean, I'm not saying to name the people, but I mean, what I feel, also Ilaria feels, I think it's what we have found out is that, yeah, that there is a scarcity of such a research. But I think location factors are of qualitative nature, yes. So sometimes it is very difficult to quantify the mechanisms, the growth mechanism and the emergence mechanisms. Moreover, we do often use proxies for location factors. I don't know. I mean, we're trying, for instance, to use, I don't know, the share of the households that have a broadband access, yes. On the, let's say, I don't know, not 3, not 2, or loud one level, doesn't matter so much, or labor unit level, yes. But these are, I mean, really proxies of specific determinants, of specific factors. And there is not large reflections how these proxies really reflect these location factors. Yes, that's also a problem. And I think some of these factors may be or should be studied using a qualitative approach. For instance, well, there's a question: how important are origins or history of funders for selecting specific location? Of course, we do have a lot of case studies of specific co-working spaces, but I would really love to see, I mean, the papers that look at the, I mean, what's the role of funders? I mean, and what is the history of, I mean, of specific co-working spaces in specific area? Yes, so. This is, I mean, not fully, I mean, and especially, it's not fully covered, definitely. I guess for independently run co-working spaces, this is a crucial factor. I mean, origins of funders and their history of life, and sometimes they have, I don't know, quitted the corporation and have some money left, and they spend it on co-working spaces. There are different stories, and there are very few typologies of the reasons behind establishing specific co-working spaces in a given area. Yes. In general, we could pose following questions: what is the role of soft factors in attracting co-working spaces? My perception and my understanding is that we lack a mixed method approach. I mean, the studies that, of course, combine qualitative and quantitative approaches, both surveys and I mean, analysis of statistical data, but also some, I don't know, ethnographic research, let's say, but to a large scale. The problem is we still do, I mean, when it comes to qualitative approaches, we do really have, I mean, very limited papers, I mean, large scale papers, let's say. Let's call them like this. When it comes to studying data, there is a problem of comparison with of this data for various countries, yes. So especially reliable data. Some of us do use coworker.com, which is for some countries okay, for the other countries is not okay, let's say, it shouldn't be used because of the overrepresentation of co-working spaces, especially those co-working spaces that are closed. But still, I think the problem with cross-country analysis and the quality of this cross-country analysis is remaining. Yes, it's remaining. Of course, we could depend upon upon selecting or looking at different sources, of course, yes, but yeah, but still, I mean, still, I think we miss the quality. I mean, the quality of data still is not enough. Yes, topics, research topics, and challenges related to research topics. I think I would like to repeat. I mean, we definitely have a too narrow focus on co-working spaces, too often treated homogeneously. I mean, sometimes we distinguish between corporate and independently run, but we do use dichotomies often. That is, I mean, always the problem in science. I mean, when you apply dichotomies, yes, or when you use dichotomies. But in fact, I think, and personally, I think we do really too much focus on co-working spaces. We should, I mean, borrow some, I mean, understanding of new working spaces from the other studies of other new working spaces. Yes, that's one point. The other point is we also should look at the I mean, composition of co-working spaces. So composition, especially of users. Yes, and how the composition of users shape different specialities. Yes, of co-working spaces. And there is, of course, large bias towards location factors and location patterns, and especially in neoclassical approach. What I also feel is that there is quite a limited number of research about spatial behavior of co-working spaces. We could treat them as economic agents, of course, but there is a very limited, I mean, number of such a research. And what we feel, and especially observed, once more, based on the single cases, what we observe, these are relocations of co-working spaces. This is strong. This is highly interesting. I mean, how do co-working spaces behave in a specific space, and how do they change their location? And what are the reasons behind the changes of these locations? Yes, this is quite important, I guess. I have already mentioned some couple of future research avenues, but just to add to them, I would really appreciate, I mean, I really appreciate the studies of hybrid co-working spaces, because I feel the growing number of co-working spaces is becoming hybrid. And if we take the assumption, if we follow the assumption that co-working spaces are more resilient, and especially during the crisis periods and COVID-19, etc., but also maybe future economic crisis periods, then we should, I mean, focus our studies on hybrid co-working spaces, especially the spatial forms and drivers. Yes. What is also missing, I guess, is also the missing, I mean, to studying the spatial patterns of corporate co-working spaces that, especially in some cities, emerge and mushroom. And in the other cities of the similar, let's say, similar number of inhabitants, they do not really, I mean, they do not really grow. And the question is why, of course. I mean, we should also, I mean, link this literature also with studies of high-tech communities or startup communities. We do not really use this literature so much. And that's the question: to what extent the importance of location factors differ between? That's the main question, because the importance, significance of location factors differ between countries and cities, between different ownership types. That's also, I think, quite important. And to what extent the importance of location factors change over time. That's quite important. I mean, these are studies that we have started with Pavel Bednar, and Oliver also is here, I think, and Lukasz. So just to conduct time series research, yeah, that would be, I mean, to have a longitudinal research, that would be really, really nice. I mean, to see what areas do benefit more and what areas do lose. Yes, that would be quite important. The other related issues, for instance, the location close to universities is important. In Cairo, see the research by Murad et al., and Milano, this research of Ilaria's group, and it's not as important in the case of Warsaw. Why? And also, we could choose different, I mean, location factors and look at them and see, yeah, these factors are important in specific cultural and social contexts, and in the other social contexts, they do not really matter. That would be, I mean, really nice to have such a perspective. So call for cross-country, cross-city studies of also location factors, not only patterns. Yes. Okay. And the final slide with the directions of future research that relates to working group 3 deliberations or talks. Do policies impact the location of working spaces? We do have quite a lot of case study analysis showing that single regional, national policies have large impact. But the question is that we try also to, in the COST Action, to address is to what extent and what kind of policies do really matter. I mean, and to what extent, I mean, we could say policies impact the location in general sense, yes. Because I guess there is quite a lot of national regulations having an impact, but they do really differ in across countries. What is the role of local stakeholders? I mean, in our studies of maker spaces in Poland, we do really we have found out that, I mean, local librarians, local directors of local schools or cultural centers, they are really important stakeholders when it comes to attracting maker spaces to specific places. So, I mean, I guess it's a bit different strand of research, but it's not linked with our research too. What is, I think, very important is to study direction of causalities. Yes, so do co-working spaces, because we always study, I mean, co-working spaces we often study co-working spaces and in relation to various services, knowledge intensive business services, KIBS, or creative firms, and we could also find a correlation or conglomeration, yes, of these types of co-working spaces and services. But the question is, what is the direction of these causalities, of these relations? So, do co-working spaces attract services, or vice versa? Services attract co-working spaces, and what relation is stronger? Yes. So I think there is a need for qualitative insights in here. The next point is, what is the role played by corporate co-working spaces? Do they contribute to attracting new co-working spaces in the local market, in a specific city, let's say, or were they rather attracted by the growth of independent co-working spaces or the growth of startup or tech scene? Yes, because what we have found out in the case of Poland, especially Warsaw, is that we have found out that there were different stages of evolution of co-working spaces. And firstly, the independent co-working spaces emerged. And then after a couple of years, when the market got mature, the startup scene, and also the startup scene, well, was becoming bigger and bigger. Then the next stage was the entrance of corporate co-working spaces. So, but it's not always. I mean, it's not even often. That's quite also often that both corporate and independent co-working spaces enter almost simultaneously. Yeah. So, in fact, that's quite interesting to have. I mean, not a single country or a single city perspective. So, I would call for a more multi-perspective view of location patterns, of location factors of co-working spaces. Yeah, and thank you for your attention. I see there are some questions.
Thank you very much, Greg. Yes, by the moment we have one question. Can you read it, or if you want, I can read it for you? You have access.
How do you define hybrid co-working spaces in this context? In our studies, we do use a hybridity context in a very narrow sense. I think Heli would maybe could talk more about it, but in this sense, I'm really looking at hybrid co-working spaces in their functional sense. Yes, so if there is a new working space that house not a single co-working space, but also I don't know, incubator or the other type, or a maker space, or if there is a maker space and co-working spaces in one place, then we treat them that in my talk, I treat them as hybrid co-working spaces, but of course there are different dimensions of hybridity. I mean, Mirior et al. Described it, also the works by Chiara, by Helianek. There's quite a lot written about it. Chiara asked about the research on failure. These are a couple of research problems in here. Of course, there's the first research problem, how to identify the. Carlos, would you like? Okay.
I was actualizing.
Okay. The first issue, it's very interesting. I mean, the research on failure, but the first topic is, but it's not very difficult one sometimes. But well, let me start. The first issue is how to identify how to find out respondents. Yes, so the people who run these co-working spaces. But if you have the association of co-working spaces, that it makes it easier. If you know the people who know the other people, I mean, especially the people who organize the community life of maker spaces, for instance, in terms of maker spaces, they can say that they can list the people who have the failures. And in Poland, we are lucky because we know such guys. Yes. But but I think that could be a large problem. I mean, how to look for spaces that have closed and how to study the factors that cause the failure. I'm fully inclined towards qualitative research in this respect. I mean, to have in-depth interviews and ask about and talk about the factors, failure factors. But it seems to be very interesting for future research, because then we could avoid, or you could say how to avoid failures. Yes, thanks, Chiara, for this research.
There is another question from Piotr Bolange.
Yeah, in regard to co-workers research, did you take under considerations looking into mobility of creative class, startup funders and freelancers? No, I do have some experience personally in studying spatial aspects of mobility recently, but not of co-workers, but of let's say not really freelancers and not even creative class, but studies of employees of business service sectors in Krakow, in Poland. But I do not really. I mean, in my research, I mean, the research of co-workers is a different field. I mean, it's very interesting, and that's what I would like really to look at and see. But we haven't studied the mobility, the specialties of mobility, which are interesting because you can either ask about where do the startup funders and freelancers come from. What is their academy? What are their CVs? So how do they change their work, and in what sectors have they worked? That's quite interesting. I mean, so to what extent? I mean, I would argue to say, I mean, the co-workers are really heterogeneous group in this respect. Yeah, but it's pretty much interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Greg, I have two questions.
Yeah, sure.
One related to this last comment by Piotr, that is about the role of digital nomads. As you know, recently this topic has increased in several places, well, in several areas of research, mainly qualitative than quantitative. And I would like to ask you, how do you see the relationship between digital nomads and co-working spaces evolving in the future? And which is the role that you see in the spatial design? Let's see, how can you analyze from a spatial point of view the impact of digital nomads on co-working spaces?
Much more I would like to, I mean, thank you. But I would use a comparative, I would use a combined perspective of both qualitative and quantitative analysis. We are trying to do something like this in Germany together with Thomas Vogel. combining, well, but I think it's more quantitative still, too much quantitative. We are looking at peripheral areas in Germany, especially tourist areas, and trying to find out whether the tourism has somehow influenced the emergence of digital nomads in these specific areas, and vice versa. Okay, and what else? And yeah, I mean, what was your second question?
Yeah, it was about which is the how do you see the spatial design of the research that combines digital nomads with co-working spaces? In which way can go this research strategy? That's the point.
Yeah, I would love to see papers that focus on tourist areas and focus on attractive areas, especially attractive areas around the world, but a comparative study, especially that try to involve both interviews, especially in-depth interviews, and well, when it comes to statistics, it's still difficult. I mean, to apply it. I mean, to statistical analysis. I mean, when it comes to digital nomads. So, I would really love to, but I don't have any clue. I mean, not any clue for now. I don't have any clue how to do it. Yeah.
Okay. And the other question was regarding the technology. No, as we nowadays we are having the explosion of new technologies as AI, artificial intelligence, and other ways, robotization. How do you expect that the new working spaces will accommodate these changing technologies and work practices? No, and how do these changes will impact on the spatial organization of these spaces? Yeah, I know that is a big question.
I think I will start with this, saying that co-workers are really very flexible. So I guess they are one of the first people, the pioneers of using digital technologies and also artificial intelligence. So I think I mean, I think artificial intelligence can have an impact on that, on co-working spaces, but I would rather say it's going to be a positive impact. So the new co-working spaces will emerge. I mean, it does not hamper at least the emergence of co-working spaces, the growth of co-working spaces. So yeah, that's it at least for now.
Yeah, well, we have more questions.
Yeah, I'm just looking at them. Soft factors. Well, we do have a, let's say, there is, I mean, a fuzzy distinction between, you're right, fuzzy distinction between hard and soft factors. But by hard factors, I mean, for instance, the access to specific infrastructure, that's the example. But by soft factors, I mean, especially these factors that are related to origins of funders they have mentioned. Yeah. So if it's typical, if the origins of funders, I mean, have their families in a specific village, rural village in the Alps. Yes, and they do have the grandmother house they have inherited, for instance, and they have inherited it, and they have established the co-working spaces there in the Alps, yes, in their former grandmother house. That's really a soft factor. Of course, we can measure it, but then we could talk with every funder, yes, with every funder, and these are factors that are difficult to measure, let's say. Maybe with policy reviews regarding visa issues for digital nomads, yes. That's quite interesting, because some countries have introduced this different policy measures for issuing the visas for digital nomads. Like I think Portugal, I'm not sure. Yeah. So this is quite important when you study the policy dimension. Yeah. Plus some qualitative research in digital nomads environment. Yes, sure, Heli. Thank you.
And you have a last question from Oliver. that is asking if you are currently working or thinking about critical review about current shortcomings in the topic of the spatial patterns, location factors of co-working spaces.
To be honest, to be honest, I'm working currently on many papers that are on different stage, even with Oliver, that are on different stage of, let's say, evolution. Some of them are under review, some of them are being written, some of them are stopped or delayed. But I think that could be a point to write something like this. But then we would need do maybe a systematic literature review just to identify the research gaps once more, and maybe implement these our reflections, our thoughts. But it's definitely it would be definitely highly welcome. I mean, such critical review, maybe more critical than mine or more in depth than mine, but surely there is a space to do such things, but not in the next half of a year because I'm busy. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So
thank you for all the questions. Yes. Yeah.
So if we will wait like 1 minute if someone is writing a question, and then if no one says ask anything, so we can conclude the seminar. There is one question. Is there any study on location consideration factors of the co-working spaces owners? So a study that focus the location factors from the owner's perspective?
From the owner's perspectives, well, there's quite a lot of studies of location factors that you use as, I mean, statistical data and try to explain with the statistical data the presence of the co-working spaces in a specific place. But when it comes to owner's perspective, maybe some of the audience can help. But on top of my mind, I cannot just give you the example. Owner's perspective. I mean, there's quite a lot of studies looking at the specific 1, 2, or 3 or 4 co-working spaces, and how have they emerged from the owner's perspective. Especially in the volume Chiara co-edited, I think, in TWR conference, that there are papers looking at from the American TWR 2022, yes, in September, the conference that took place in Milano, yes. So there is quite a lot of very short papers with regards to the perspective of the owners, I guess. Oh yeah, Piotr has, yeah, human phase of co-working. Thank you, Piotr. Okay.
I think that there are few studies, because when you are trying to study the location factors from owner's perspective, you have to reduce the sample in order to have a more accurate analysis. So I think I have the same opinion as you, that it's complicated to have a lot of studies from the owner's perspective.
These are case study based research. Is it possible for X in one study to only focus on soft factors, or should we have both? I do not fully understand what you mean, Helena, while saying for X in one study. Could you, I mean, elaborate more that or clarify? For example, okay. Is it possible, for example, in one study to only focus on soft factors, or should we have both? You know, if we have a good, thorough, comprehensive review or study of soft factors, then we could focus on exclusively on them, on a relatively, let's say, not a sample of a few co-working spaces. Then it would be great. I think it's doable, very difficult, but doable, to combine soft and hard factors in one research. Hossein has raised his hand, I think, some time ago.
Yeah, they raised No, but they raised and then they
Okay,
put
okay.
down at the moment, so it was an error, I think.
I think it would be great. I mean, to have the paper that looks, because what I really would look like is I would really not to focus narrowly on the, I mean, location factors and statistical data, but also open this perspective up to these soft factors I've mentioned. Yeah.
Okay. Any question? I think no, there are no more questions.
No. Yeah, and Heli responded yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, with a smile. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So we can conclude here. Thank you very much to all the attendants, to all the people that come and share with us the questions. And thank you very much, Greg, for your presentation. It was very useful and synthesize all the present, past, and future research on co-working spaces focus on location. So it was very useful, I think.
It's my perspective, personal. So you could have different
your
views.
Perspective.
I'm always open for I mean, discussion, collaboration, you know, if I have time, I must repeat. Yeah. Thank you very much. I mean, also for questions. I mean, some of them were really inspiring. Yes. Okay. All of them were inspiring, but I mean, some of them were just opening my eyes to new directions. Thank you.
I will stop the record.